So for folks who may not understand, how was Jussie Smollett found guilty on 5 out of 6 counts of disorderly conduct? Just folks may not understand why you're guilty on 5 but not on 6.
Okay, so let me start by saying that we don't understand either. So in the law, here is how it typically works. So you could be, let's say that you're charged with armed robbery and let's say aggravated kidnapping. So those are 2 separate things that you were alleged to have done. So in a scenario like that, you could be found guilty of the armed robbery, but not of the aggravated kidnapping. 2 different offenses. The prosecution would have to prove them both. In this instance, Mr. Smollett was charged with 6 counts that emanated from the exact same thing. So we have no idea how the jury reached their conclusion, but I tell you this, it's grounds for appeal.
Gotcha. So, Ms. Walker, let me ask you this. What do you think went wrong on the side of the defense? Because the idea is to be able to convince the jury that Mr. Smollett was innocent. What do you think went wrong?
Well, I understand your question, but I think there's a better way to put it. I think that it wasn't a matter of what went wrong on the defense. It was a matter of what's wrong with the criminal justice system, what's wrong with the case being tried in the media before we ever stepped foot in the courtroom. What happened to the presumption of innocence? In this scenario, you had our former chief of police, Eddie Johnson, going on Good Morning America, fabricating things, putting things in a way as if we don't live in a country where you're innocent until proven guilty. He made it seem as if Mr. Smollett might as well turn himself into the authorities on the first day that they suspected that there was an issue. And that's the real problem, because that could happen to anyone.
So a lot of legal analysts have said that it was a bad idea for Mr. Smollett to take the stand. Why did he take the stand?
Well, he was the only one that could tell his story, obviously. But more importantly, he was the only person that could rebut the claims made by the Osendero brothers. And, it's interesting, anyone can armchair quarterback, but I would find very few people who were in the courtroom who saw the testimony of the brothers and also Mr. Smollett who would disagree with the notion that the brothers lacked credibility and that Mr. Smollett came across very credible. I will say, there have been other events that kind of overshadowed it, but I was the one who cross-examined Ola Osendero, the older brother. My cross-examination started out with 5 different impeachments. And what that is where you show that the person's testimony in court is different than their testimony had been previously, either with the police with an interview or in front of the grand jury. In the case of Ola Osendero, I impeached him on both. He had prior inconsistent statements in front of the grand jury, which is also an under oath proceeding, as well as his taped interview with the police. And these were substantive issues that, let's be real here. He was lying then or he was lying in court. So Mr. Smollett was unimpeached in his testimony. Again, I think this was a case where the decisions had been made, unfortunately, by the public, by the members of our jury who, did what they could, but I feel as if he was tried and convicted in the court of public opinion.
Did you regret having Mr. Smollett take the stand?
No, not at all. I think that he was able to explain things from his side. He came across as very personable. There were a lot of things that he explained as far as his background, his family life, his ascension to fame, and how he started off as a waiter at different points in his life. And I think that's important when you have someone who's a celebrity. There's so much, surrounding this case, to be able to see them as a human. I think that there were a lot of forces at play, political, from the police. We had a witness who took the stand and told us that he was pressured to change his story. He had told police that he saw it appeared to be a white or pale-skinned person in a ski mask. He could only see the area, surrounding the eyes and the nose. And he was a Black gentleman. He's a security guard at a hotel that was in the area. And he said this person was white or pale-skinned. And when he talked to prosecutors a year later, his story changed. Now, what's interesting about that is he told us he felt pressured and threatened to change his story. Right. He also said when he did change his story in his statement, he also stood by the fact that his original statement, where he stated that this person was white, was truthful. So that definitely indicated that even once he relented to changing his statement, he struggled with that. He was still wanted it known that his original story was the correct one.
Yeah, I want to touch on that for a minute. And full transparency, I do a series called Exonerated every single Wednesday. I'm not comparing the people who are wrongfully convicted and spend 30 years in jail to Mr. Smallett. But one of the things that these men have told me over and over, and women, that one of the most dangerous things that happens is that a prosecutor threatens a witness. And so I read this in the Associated Press, and that disturbed me, to be honest, that he said, I was threatened by the prosecutor, and this was a security guard. And I'm just wondering, I didn't see a lot of news coverage about that.
Right.
What is that? Do you know how he was threatened? And I'm just curious why that didn't appear to resonate more. That really made my made me pause for a minute, hearing the word threatened by a prosecutor.
As well it should. It should really bother and stick with absolutely everyone who hears that. I think there were more sensational aspects of the case, and maybe that's why we didn't hear more about it, but it's absolutely troubling. He was not my witness, and I know from what he told all of us as a group, he said that he was there in the prosecutor's office for a very long time, and he felt that unless he went along with what they were kind of, pressuring him to say, that he would be there indefinitely, and he didn't know what may actually happen to him. Now, as far as the threat aspect, it was actually Mr. Allen, Shay Allen. He is a colleague who was also on the case. It was his witness, and they talked more specifically individually, but that is what he said to us as a group.
And there was only one Black juror, and this is in Cook County, which is 26% Black. What was your approach to the strategy for appealing to a white Midwestern jury that presumably might be anti-Hollywood? I'm sure you had to think about that as you are trying this case.
We did. Well, let me start by saying that the jury selection process during the time of COVID was also a factor here. The pool that we got was more skewed. We normally see more of a racially balanced pool when we're selecting juries, is just in our regular cases. And so it was definitely surprising to see this pool. I think that, a lot of people are afraid of COVID, afraid of sitting there in a mask for, an extended period of time, which plays a factor. As far as the jury pool that we got, we had to walk a fine line. It wasn't a situation where all of the police did a bad job. Some of them did, but some of them did a great job and were respectful and did what they were supposed to. So obviously, a member of the jury had police members in her family. And so we always were cognizant of that. And we're cognizant of the fact that ultimately this case comes down to, whether or not, basically you either believe Mr. Smallett or you believe the brothers. And based on what we presented in court, we were definitely surprised with the outcome, given the fact that the Osendero brothers' credibility was definitely called into question, and definitely shown to be, I don't want to say non-existent, but definitely questionable.
What were some of the inconsistencies in the Osendero brothers that you say challenges their credibility?
Okay, I have several examples. It's one of those, how much time do you have? So the first one that sticks out is the check for $3,500. That was all in the media. So let me break that down. The check for $3,500 on the bottom in the memo says, well, my apologies, something in my background was ringing. The check says for meal plan and for training. So here's the thing. Mr. Smollett had already received the meal plan prior to the attack for several days. In fact, he received the meal plan, he received the shopping list, he received a breakdown of micro and macronutrients that the brothers had supplied for him that were specifically designed for his fitness goals. And in the grand jury testimony that was, I believe it was on February 15th, either February 15th or the 20th of 2019, a few days after they were taken into custody, Mr. Osendero, the older brother, he said that the check was for the meal plans and training. He did not waver in that. But in testimony, he said, well, he gave us the check a couple of days before for the staged attack. We didn't charge him for anything. We really didn't know what it was for, but we felt like it was for this. Those are clearly two inconsistent statements. The second thing is he said that originally Mr. Smollett had told him to use gas on him instead of bleach. Now, gas obviously is quite different than bleach for a number of reasons. In his grand jury testimony, he said that he didn't want to be seen putting gas into any type of container. In other words, he didn't want to be, if something happened, he didn't want to be caught putting gas in this container. In his testimony, he said it was for safety reasons, even though he never explained. I asked him, well, were you concerned that, it might be flammable, things of that nature? And he was like, no, it's just gas. That was all he would say. He was also, and this is an important one, he was impeached on whether or not he lived at the home where his younger brother and his family lived. That's important because Ola Osendero is a convicted felon. He has an aggravated battery conviction in his background. And during the execution of the search warrant, after the brothers were taken into custody, there were 2 assault rifles found. It was a 12-gauge shotgun and a Mossberg assault rifle that had a laser scope. It was found in a bedroom that also contained Ola Osendero's driver's license, as well as his state ID, the driver's license with that address on it. He was making the claim that he did not live at that house so that he could separate himself from those weapons found in the home and not be charged. So he was impeached on whether or not he lived there by text between him and his brother, where his brother asked him, are you coming home? By his grand jury testimony, and by the attendant facts. You had been on a trip for 2 weeks, but your driver's license and your state ID were at your house. There's no reason to play games with that. He also was put up at the South Loop Hotel after the search warrant was executed. And if he lived somewhere else, there would have been no reason for him to be housed at the South Loop Hotel by the good citizens of Chicago. So those were some very important points. There were more. Like I said, how long do you have? But those are some of the more substantial ones that stand out that really called the brothers' credibility into question.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not sure if you can answer this, and I followed this case a lot. One of the things that I don't understand, and I had callers who would call in and say this, is that if the Osendario brothers targeted Jussie, a homophobic attack, and wanted to make it look like it was, it was racist white people or whatever, how in the world did they know that he would be at Subway at 2 a.m.? That's one of the things people say, okay, who knows? I mean, and I don't think there's anything wrong with going to Subway at 2 a.m. I've done that. That there are people in the subway.
It is open, right? It's open.
It is open, right? There are people in the subway. I think you said that. There are people.
Numerous people, yes.
Yeah, with the surveillance footage. But
Right.
How would they know he was in that area at 2 a.m.? That's a big thing people have called in and said.
Sure, absolutely. So that was another thing that was not really in the media. And here's what's interesting. It wasn't that they knew he was at Subway at 2 a.m. They had been waiting in an area very near his apartment where you could see that the exit and entrance that he typically used getting in and out of his building. They had been there for 40 minutes. That was something that I didn't know until I came on this case. So it wasn't that they showed up in this location and he just happened to be walking along. It was that they laid in wait for 40 minutes. Much has been made about the fact that it was so cold, but actually the date, that January date in 2019 was just before the polar vortex. The other thing of note from the Subway video is that the other patrons of Subway, they weren't all bundled up as if it was polar vortex. It was cold. I mean, it's winter in Chicago, but it wasn't that level cold. I believe it was maybe 12 degrees, which I'm not arguing is warm, but it certainly wasn't, the 30 and 40 below wind chill that people have been talking about. Not at that point. The polar vortex, I think, came like 2 days later. So they were outside laying in wait. And another point that they were impeached on was whether or not they had their phones. They said Jussie told them to leave their phones. Ola and Bola, the younger brother, were both impeached about inconsistent testimony about whether or not they had their phones. We presented an Uber driver who stated unequivocally that one of the brothers got into his Uber by himself, had a full conversation, was clearly on the phone. Not only that, but they changed their trip destination in the middle of the ride. Only the person who originates the ride can do that. And that happened while they were in the back of his Uber. So obviously they had their phones. If they were in coordination with Jussie, why would they stand outside for 40 minutes? Why wouldn't they just call him on one of their burner phones? Ola Osendero had 3 phones on him when he came back from Nigeria. There were 9 phones found in their house. So that's the other part that again, tried in the court of public opinion. The other side of it is it wasn't that they happened to show up at Subway. They had been there for almost an hour. So
I do have to ask you this, and I know we got to be careful talking about this because you want to go to appeal and there will be a sentencing. But I'm saying this. I read some disturbing things about the judge, Judge James Lynn, and his past. He is blocked from being on any sex offender cases because he reversed a jury's verdict on a Black woman who was sexually assaulted by a white man. And then there is this report that during a sidebar, the judge reportedly lunged and snarled at you. So if you can, explain what your experience was with Judge James Lynn.
Well, you're absolutely right. We do have a situation where our client is still awaiting sentencing. And also, it's an interesting scenario to be in, to still practice amongst, colleagues and different people within the community. I will say this though, and I've already said this publicly. I never felt as if the lunge or the movement was aimed to physically intimidate. What happened was this: we made a motion for mistrial. And I watched anger wash over his body, or he became upset or shocked. It was definitely a definitive emotion that I watched wash over his body, his face. And he had a physical response towards that. That was to jerk towards me in kind of a sideways motion. And I don't know if it was a conscious decision. I don't know if it was born from him being upset. It seemed to be born of shock or surprise or anger combination. I'm not sure. And he said on the record that he was shocked by our emotion. But here's the thing. With all due respect, we all have jobs to do. We all are professionals, and you should be able to hear a motion from a group of attorneys that is on point, timely, made respectfully, without having that type of reaction. And, I don't think, again, like I said, it was made to physically intimidate me or anything like that. I think it was just born out of too much emotion. There were certainly times in this trial where things were very contentious. And that's unfortunate. It happens sometimes, when both sides are passionate about their case. But, again, I think it's important that we all remain professional. We all realize that we have a job to do. One thing you brought up that legal analysts agreed or talked about our decision to call Mr. Smollett. One thing that legal analysts, at least the ones that I've seen, have agreed on is that we made that motion for mistrial because during my cross-examination of Ola, he called my cross-examination over the issue of Ola Osendero's homophobia, he called it a collateral issue. That was a main theory of our case. And to say a collateral issue in front of a jury, that is extremely problematic. And every legal analyst that I've seen says that we absolutely should have made that motion for mistrial at the time that we did for the reasons that we did. And it was shocking to us that the judge was so surprised that it led to a physical reaction. I also want to clarify that, I didn't leave the courtroom in tears or any of the drama that's been reported. My mother was in the courtroom that day, and I did call her out as I left. I just wanted a few moments to myself. I wanted her to know I was okay. This had been a big dramatic scene, and I didn't want my mom sitting there worried about me and, freaking out. So I got emotional when I related, to the judge, what occurred, my perception of what occurred, and my voice broke, and that was it. So no, I didn't leave the courtroom crying and any of the things that, we sometimes like to put on women. It wasn't anything like that. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell, my version of what happened and what occurred. The snarling actually came from Heather Waddell, another attorney on the team. She made that observation on the record in addition to the, the lunging situation.
Ms. Walker, just so folks understand, Mr. Smollett's team is saying that the Osendero brothers, did this and they plotted, like you said, waited 40 minutes outside waiting. But why? Why in the world? This feels like elaborate. It feels, even when I think of it, like, it just seems illogical that they would do this. What do you say to people who say, why would they do this? This doesn't even make any sense.
That is the $20 million question. there was evidence presented that they wanted to be his security. After Mr. Smollett received the hate mail letter at the CineSpace studio, the studio wanted to hire security for him. That security was paid a nice sum. I think it was $5,000 a month. I'm not 100% certain on that number, but it was somewhere in that area. And the younger brother who had the relationship with Bola Osendero, he would ask him repeatedly about being his security. He would pretend like he was security when they were going out to the clubs. You know, you have to realize these Hollywood security jobs can lead to huge opportunities. You can end up, you know, being security for superstars. It can lead you into a whole world of networking and opportunity. And both brothers claim to be aspiring actors. So that is one of the theories it looks to be most likely. It would also explain why it wasn't a situation where they were looking to harm him. It was more so in our minds designed to scare him, you know, designed to say, hey, maybe I do need security. Maybe it is a little bit deeper than just receiving this letter.
So a couple more questions. I know a lot of people that want to believe Jussie Smollett, and they just say something in the milk ain't. I'm taking off my interview hat and just talking to you one-on-one.
Sure.
They're saying something in the milk ain't clean. This just doesn't sound right. This story, this case is complicated, but I know people, Black folks, Black gay folks, who say, I just think he's lying. This just does not make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I know they aren't in the courtroom, but what do you say to people who don't trust the Chicago PD? They don't trust the criminal justice system, but they're just saying something about this does not make sense.
Well, I will say this: we stand by Mr. Smollett's innocence, and we will be appealing this conviction, this finding of guilty, rather. To the people that say something isn't right, it's very interesting that in a climate of Kyle Rittenhouse, in a climate of officer after officer who shoot unarmed Black men and women in the street, that we have spent 3 years dissecting this. Basically, it's a level above a misdemeanor situation that occurred when we have so much bigger fish to fry. You know, people are certainly entitled to their opinion. Dave Chappelle, you know, a number of things that definitely counted against Mr. Smollett. But at the end of the day, I think that we as a people need to understand that we're never going to win in this system unless we decide to come together and we decide to fight for injustice and we decide to stand by our people. You know, again, Kyle Rittenhouse is something that a lot of people just can't reconcile with because they shouldn't. You know, we can't allow injustices like that to happen. And meanwhile, we're worried about whether or not, you know, somebody did something to themselves ultimately. So while we stand by his innocence, you know, people are entitled to their opinions. Let's start to decide how we can move forward in a way that's advantageous to us as a people.
Another question people had is, why did Mr. Smollett come forward with him having a sexual relationship with one of the brothers and them doing drugs together? That got really salacious in the media. Folks may not understand why he went public with that.
It was a part of the story. It was a part of what happened. It was a part of, you know, the connection that he felt and why he felt he could trust this individual as a friend at the time. And it was part of how he got into his inner circle. It also showed on the part of Bola a tendency to be duplicitous. You know, if you are engaging in these types of acts, and then it was brought out on the stand that he was also engaging in homophobic language with his brother, you know, it's a dichotomy of a person. It's, you know, it's the two faces. It's the which person can I trust if you're showing me two different ways of being? And I think ultimately that's why he made that decision. Obviously, for anyone in the LGBT community, it's a very difficult decision to decide to, you know, out someone or put someone who is not publicly out there in that arena. But it was important for the juries to have a full assessment of who this person was, who was, you know, saying one thing on one hand and doing something else on the other.
What was really strange to me reading the reports, again, the Associated Press, where the brother said that they went to a bathhouse together, but he didn't know it was a gay bathhouse. And I don't know if people picked that up, but again, I followed this case, and That was really bizarre to me. How?
It was really bizarre to us. So, okay, to give it context, because, obviously not everyone lives in Chicago. The
Right,
bathhouse in question, that it was actually just the younger brother, it was Bola Osendera who went to the
right,
bathhouse.
right.
He admitted that. That came out during his direct exam. So he fully admitted he went to the bathhouse. The bathhouse was located in a portion of town called Boys Town. It is known to be an LGBTQ area of town. There are the LGBTQ flags all over town, on buildings. I mean, it is a very proud LGBTQ part of town. There's no question in your mind when you enter it what the scenario is. It's a beautiful part of town, but there's no question where you are when you're there. The building is called Steamworks, the bathhouse in question. According to Mr. Smollett, when Bola was there, and he was there more than once, according to Mr. Smollett, there was gay porn on, and in fact, my partner Shay Allen asked Bola Osendero about that. He said, well, when you were in the bathhouse, wasn't there gay porn on the television? His answer was, I don't recall. The brothers said, I don't recall between them during testimony, during cross-examination specifically, about 50 times, which is why we have a difficult time reconciling how this jury was able to find them credible.
Do we know if the brothers were promised anything by the prosecution? Do we have is there any record of that? There's some kind of promise, some kind of immunity, anything like that?
To our knowledge, there was nothing official. There was no immunity deal. However, as I talked about the guns earlier that were found in the room with the driver's license, with the address, with the state ID, let me say this. I don't know of a scenario where a search warrant is executed on a home, convicted felons, license and ID are found in a room with 2 guns in a house that had another 9mm, as well as numerous boxes of ammunition. In fact, the police inventory said the ammunition was too numerous to count, and it was 2 guns that weren't even in the house, several different types of ammunition. I don't know of a scenario where that person wouldn't be looking at a UUW by felon. A UUW is possession of a weapon, and you can also be charged for possession of ammunition. That doesn't happen typically in our criminal cases in Chicago. So while they were not given an immunity deal to our knowledge, and that seems to be pretty clear, it seems as if, as long as they cooperated with the narrative, they were not charged with anything. There was also the situation where they were housed in the South Loop Hotel. That was after the search warrant was executed. Now, the official story is that it was because they had kicked in their door. Well, that happens quite often with executions of search warrants. And I don't know of many people who are put up in a luxury hotel after that happens. The truth is they were put up because they wanted to make sure these brothers' location was secure so that they could go to the grand jury and testify against Mr. Smallett. That's what happened. As long as they kept their story. And let me say this too. When they were taken into custody, they were taken into custody getting off the plane from Nigeria. They were taken into a customs office and then transferred over to Chicago PD. They initially denied accounts, denied participation, denied it. After they were in custody for 47 hours, that's when the whole narrative changed. At that point, the 2 brothers were able to speak to each other in custody. They also had extensive time with their lawyer, and their lawyer and just the 2 of them alone for quite some time. And it was during that time period that everything became the brainchild of Mr. Smallett. So it seems as if, and this is just obviously our speculation, there didn't need to be an official deal as long as they were saying what the narrative put forth by CPD, then they were just fine. They didn't have to worry about being charged with things that in pretty much any other scenario they would have been.
And I kind of asked this before, but I just got to ask it again. What you're saying to me sounds logical. It makes sense. But then why do you think Jussie Smollett was found guilty on 5 out of 6 counts?
My honest opinion, you can never say what's in the mind of a jury. That combination of 12 people is constitutional, but I will say this. I think that with this case in particular, with it being tried in the court of public opinion the way it was, with it being politicized the way that it was here in Chicago, I think that people are human. People may have had some fears about returning to work. How am I going to go back to my colleagues if I made this decision? I think all those things play into it. Definitely we were not happy with the diversity on the jury. So we can never second guess. We can never get into those people's minds. But I would have to think it would be hard to completely divorce those feelings.
And do you think Mr. Smollett received a fair trial? And if you think he didn't, do you think it was because he's Black and gay?
I think that there's several issues that we have for appeal. I don't know that it was an LGBTQ or African-American specifically issue. I'm not painting it with those brushstrokes, but I am saying that we have numerous grounds for appeal that we are examining currently. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to.
It's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead. You said numerous grounds for appeal.
We do. We've got to, we have to order all of the transcripts. We've got to file our post-trial motions and see what the outcome of the post-trial motions will be. Okay, sorry about that. It finally stopped.
Okay.
So yes, as we go through the post-trial motion process, a post-trial motion may be granted. If it's not, then we do have, basically our grounds for appeal is how long do you have? It's numerous. And I don't want to make it seem as if it's just this case. Generally on any jury trial, especially a felony jury trial, there's typically something that happens that, the appellate court can definitely examine. And that's no different here.
Well, Ms. Walker, I want to thank you for coming on and talking to us. I think the truth is just important to come out. I truly want to thank you for coming on. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Folks have their judgments and their perceptions. There's so many memes online. Is there anything else we should be aware of?
I appreciate you having me and I appreciate you asking that question. Again, like I said, when I was talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, I just think this, I've been an attorney for 21 years. My first job out of law school was under Johnny Cochran. I consider myself one of his torchbearers. And I think that we are at a critical junction in this country. I think it's critically important that we come together as a people and start to address some of these ills that we cannot succeed and move forward unless we adequately deal with them. The criminal justice system needs reform. Police need reform. We have to start to look at some of these structures that have us in a situation where the criminal justice system is in control of our lives. It is depressing to represent young men and young women who look like me as often as I do. It's depressing to go to 26th Street. It feels like a modern day plantation in a lot of ways. And, again, it's funny to make jokes about things that are, made fun of by a popular comedian, of course. But we've got to keep in mind that there's a bigger picture here. There are lives at stake. I have 2 young boys, and I am dedicated to making sure that this world is better for them. And we've got to start that now. And I just want to start to see some real reform, some real change. I want to start to see us being taken seriously. I saw a meme. It was a split screen of Kyle Rittenhouse and Tamir Rice. It was posted on Instagram. And that stuck with me because my kids are 5 and 6 years old. And one boy lost his life in a few seconds playing with a toy gun, and another one was able to walk down the street with an assault rifle strapped to his chest and was congratulated by police officers. That's what we have to start to address.